Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name's Steve Luby. I'm director of the Human and Planetary Health Initiative here at Stanford. I want to welcome everyone, both all of you who are in the room and all of you who are on Zoom as well. We're going to talk today about regenerative agriculture, bringing indigenous practice to food systems. But I want to begin by recognizing that Stanford sits on the ancestral land of the Muwekma-Ohlone tribe. This land was and continues to be of great importance to the Ohlone people. Consistent with our values of community and inclusion, we have a responsibility to acknowledge, honor, and make visible the university's relationship to Native people. The indigenous people in California, the Americas, and globally have much to teach us regarding sustainability. The US government designates November as Native American Heritage Month. I'm grateful that we can spend some time together learning from an indigenous perspective on our contemporary crisis. This is also a particularly appropriate way to inaugurate Stanford's Human and Planetary Health Spotlight Series. You're all in the spotlight today. The Spotlight series will present quarterly sessions exploring issues and promising approaches to face the great challenges that we face in planetary health. And we see affordable nutrition in human and planetary health as really central because it is central to human and planetary well-being. And it's one of the 4 focus areas of the Human and Planetary Health Initiative. We aim to add value to the excellent work from the Center for Food Security and the Environment and the Center for Ocean Solutions. We recognize we're on a changing planet with growing demand, and we really seek to generate knowledge to adapt the food system to provide healthy, affordable human nutrition while supporting thriving, biodiverse, terrestrial and aquatic environments. So this afternoon, we're going to have a very interesting conversation, and we all look forward to your questions, both those of you in the room and those of you on Zoom. Please use the Q&A feature, and Allison will be tracking that, so we'll try to get to as many questions as we can. So Reginaldo Haslett-Marroquin began working in economic development projects with indigenous Guatemalan communities back in 1988. He served as a consultant for the United Nations Development Programs Bureau in Latin America, and as an advisor to the World Council of Indigenous Peoples. Regie is an owner and co-founder of Tree Range Farms Incorporated and founder and former president of the Regenerative Agriculture Alliance. He was awarded the very prestigious Ashoka Fellowship in 2018 for his work in regenerative poultry systems. He also authored In the Shadow of Green Man, My Journey from Poverty and Hunger to Food Security and Hope. This afternoon, Regie will be interviewed by our own Chris Field, the director of Stanford's Woods Institute for the Environment. Chris is a professor of Earth System Science, of biology, and a senior fellow at both Woods and at the Freeport Institute. His research focuses on climate change, especially solutions that improve lives right now to decrease the amount of future warming and support vibrant economies. So over to you.
Thank you, Steve. It's a real pleasure to meet you. From my perspective, the big opportunity we have this afternoon is to explore the interface between areas of my interest, climate change and a sustainable future, and your interest, which I want to start by characterizing as the interface between regenerative food systems and spiritual well-being. And maybe you could start with just a couple of comments about the way you think about the relationship between spiritual well-being and food.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Welcome, everyone. And just before we start, this is Jennifer Cepeda. She's also with the team at Tree Range Farms. And with other parts of the team, we have started the process of launching this market-facing company that is literally materializing the answer to the very question you're asking. But I would like to step 3-4 steps back and just, first of all, like you said, this is ancestral land. And so the spirit of our ancestors are with us. And I want to first ask permission to speak to you, for we are simply interpreters of their wisdom and interpreters of their energy. We are an expression even of their energy. So the question of spirituality and food is actually not about the relationship, but it is the foundation of what food is and who we are. So if we step sufficiently back, both in time and away from the earth, you will see a living organism, which is the planet. And if we step back enough in time, we will see energy that was floating, molten, toxic, completely devoid of life, which over billions of years came reorganized. The systems put uranium somewhere safe for us not to touch it. All kinds of energy that were toxic to life and the ability for life to emerge were properly tucked away until life eventually was possible. We're spiritual beings. We're simply the expression of the elements of the earth. Between the carbon, the hydrogen, the nitrogen, and the oxygen, it's pretty much 95.7% of your body. It is straight out of the earth. There is no other way to put it. When we eat, we're simply replenishing the energy that we are spending. And we are replenishing those very elements, those elements that form the molecules of our life. And so to think that spirituality and food are somehow not part of the same is actually a denial of who we are as expressions of the energy and the never-ending cycles of energy and energy transformation of the planet, which now we can verify through scientific research by establishing the processes by which, the laws of thermodynamics has established that energy cannot be created nor destroyed, can only be transformed. And by studying the biophysics and the chemistry of the planet, which defines the way the carbon, the hydrogen, the oxygen, and all of that, and nitrogen combines to create the immense line of molecules, carbohydrates, and all of that, that make our bodies possible to sit here and to listen. That really is now scientifically verifiable that we are spiritual beings, that we owe our existence not only to the same air that the dinosaurs breathed 60,000 years ago, but also to the ancestors that still continue, their energy continues to be here with us. So that is the grounding of regenerative, not agriculture, not regenerative food, but regenerative ways of thinking, regenerative ways of learning, of knowing. For knowledge and knowing are not the same. Knowledge without the presence of wisdom, which defines the ways we know, can be turned into a weapon of mass destruction, like we have done with over 83,000 chemicals, all designed to kill. And we did that in the name of food. There's nothing more separate from the spiritual grounding that gave us birth over geo-evolutionary process than to do something like that. And yet we have called that food.
And maybe to ask that question from the flip side, tell me how you think about the relationship between, I'll say in quotes, modern industrial agriculture and the spiritual foundations. Is there a way to produce food industrially in a way that honors the traditions of the earth that you speak about?
Oh, yes. Not only that, the industrial level is the only way the earth does it. But the earth doesn't do it for the purpose of extraction and profit and domination and colonization. That's the difference. And so what we call food systems, industrial food systems today, they don't follow the natural process of energy transformation, because in those processes, there is no room for colonization and exploitation. You can't do that. But if you want to create a system that is completely focused on the extraction of the natural resources of the planet, then you create linear patterns and you create methodology, technology, economics, politics, and all of that so that the end purpose is the extraction at a mass scale, at an industrial scale. But what you end up with is the industrialization of the destruction of the planet rather than the industrialization of the production of food. Because food can be produced at mass scale industrial levels by the very existing biophysical and chemical processes of the planet itself, which evolved over billions of years rather than the last 50 years that we have come to know biophysics and chemistry. So it is doable, but it isn't going to be done by the corporate system, which was not designed, it's not in this DNA to actually behave according to the design of the planet itself.
Yeah, that actually connects very closely with one of the themes from my research from some decades ago, where we were trying to figure out how much plant growth there is on the planet. And one of the surprising conclusions at that time was that in the vast majority of agricultural areas, farmers didn't grow as much as nature grew. That when we only grow crops for part of the year, or we plow heavily, that unless we add really large amounts of synthetic fertilizer or water, nature does a better job of producing plants than we do. And as you say, the planet knows how to be productive. What it doesn't know is how to be sustainable under a heavy extractive regime.
Correct. Maybe another way to express something from a more spiritual perspective is that the evolutionary processes that gave birth to the biodiversity of the planet, which, by the way, it's only about 1% of what it was before the dinosaurs went extinct. I mean, we're not even talking about modern history. The biodiversity we inherited as humans was only about 1% of what it was before. And yet it's so massive. Why is that? Because the processes by which the energy is transformed and the evolutionary processes allows for that recombination. Just look at, it's almost like the zeros in the computerized systems, right? You can do so much with zeros, right? Well, nature has taken this process and with very few elements, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, has been able to expand it into so many permutations that it has created this mass scale diversity of life. So the efficiency of the planet is on the transformation and recombination of energy for the purpose of optimizing, and this is what we missed, optimizing the genetic and the ancestral expression of every being on the planet. That is the purpose. And that's how it happened. When we interfere with that process, we will have a subpar, always lesser outcome. And that's what we do today. The reason we do it is because it's extremely profitable in the short term at the cost of the planet and our livelihoods and the future of the planet itself.
In the university setting, we usually talk about the operation of natural selection in terms of preserving favorable combinations of genes. And that sounds like a kind of a cold technical way of saying what you were just saying about nature's process to provide abundance in some ways. Do you see any inconsistency between Darwinian selection and natural abundance?
No, I mean, Darwin was simply observing how certain species made it and some others didn't. The problem is that we tend to observe. So let's put it this way. We're all indigenous to the planet, okay? We're all carbon-based life forms. Nobody is not indigenous. Now, the difference is how many are native to this territory? We just honored the native people to this territory. I'm indigenous. I'm indigenous to the earth, but I'm not native to this territory. Okay, so we are born both indigenous and colonizers because we are simply creatures of the planet's evolution. When we stop thinking of ourselves as the center of the universe, as the only species that matters and all of that, and that if we destroy everything else, it's okay because we'll figure a way to do whatever we need to do with it. That homocentric view and that extractive and aggressive nature is the colonizer in us. but we are just as capable of thinking and operating from an indigenous mindset because we were born both. But like many chiefs in this territory said, the one that wins is the one that you feed. So I am here trying to provide food to that other side of you because we all have it. And I'm always trying to practice and to recognize and to reevaluate and to build accountability systems that when I don't notice it tells me you're being a colonizer. There's nothing to be ashamed of. It's part of our nature, but it is something to recognize and to reckon with and to correct when we have gone too far out that way. So as we think of this whole process and we start thinking about who we truly are in this context, I think we're going to have to figure out how are we going to rebuild infrastructure, systems, institutions, and all of that to reconnect and to reteach so that we can also, as human beings, achieve our optimal inherited geoevolutionary blueprint. For that is all that the cycles of the planet have always been trying to do and achieved it to such level of perfection that it is ignorant, arrogant, disrespectful, and I don't know what else, to pretend that a scientist can come up with a better idea to how to improve what the earth perfected over billions of years. That's all I have to say about that one.
We'll swing back to this. I have a couple of specific questions, but I wanted to ask about how you think about the connection between involvement in the food system in regenerative agriculture and the value that individuals get. And I would guess that you might be the only person in the room who really spends your time growing well, how many people grow their own food? Okay, well, and do it full time? Okay, so we got a bunch of part-time farmers, and which is really impressive, by the way. Thank you all. But how should people think about the way to connect with the themes you're talking about if they're a part-time farmer or not a farmer at all?
It's a really important question. And it's probably the question of our century, of our time. And how do you do that? Well, the first thing we got to understand is that there is no 4 cardinal points. There's 7 of them. 7 cardinal points that define who we are. You know, from the north, the Native Americans native to these territories showed us that you inspire the wisdom, right? That's where wisdom comes from the white buffalo. From the east, you get the creativity, the brightness of the sun. From the west, you get the time to rest, to reckon with the darkness, to reckon with the bad, not the bad, but the spirits and to the stuff that we do that we may want to correct the following day. From the south, you get the warmth of the people and the connectivity that is among us that comes from the heart. From above, we get all the energy that gave us literally the breath of life. From below, grounds us on the fact that we are native, that we are indigenous to the earth, to this planet. And from the center is where everything emanates. And so when you don't have to have anyone else teach you this, all you have to do is reconnect back to that knowledge that we are born with, which sits right there, that many cultures have identified. Some call it chakra, I believe, in certain cultures. Others call it spirituality. However we want to call that space where our center of energy is, all we have to do is re-access that which we have been separated from in the name of our freedom and liberty. And so as we become more individualized as a societal way of structuring exploitation and extraction, we need to resist that, go back to that space and reconnect with these 2 things that we bring with us and that we can regain knowledge of. Our innate intelligence, we are born with it. It's scientifically verified too, that we are born intelligent to a very large scale and that we are indigenous to this space. That recognition of those 2 things opens up this new space that we normally don't see. When we think as, I'm gonna go to work, so the relationship of a worker in a company, for example, the fact that we think that we work to get paid, it's actually denying all of the reasons for which we live. We don't work to get paid. We work to do something, or at least we should, once we start reconnecting again. And sometimes, like in my book, from my journey from poverty and hunger to food security and hope, it is actually an expression of that energy from inside, which in the worst conditions you can imagine, I did not take the path that gave me the shortest destination to something that wasn't me. And that we all carry around us. So access your indigenous, your innate intelligence, process things, dream about them. There's processes by which you can prime your dreams, you can do lucid dreaming, you can do all kinds of things that actually access that when you are not distracted by everything around you, which is the best time. Sleeping to me is like a meditation, and I have a hard time sleeping for many reasons, but when I can sleep, it is the greatest meditation. And I try to do that because that is so much knowledge right in there. And then we come back out of that innate intelligence, and then we build what we call the indigenous intellect, which is built by observing, is built by telling stories like we are doing right now. Go share this story. Every time you share the story, you got to think about it. It's like trying to remember something. If you write it, they say you repeat it 7 times before you're done. Well, repetition is the foundation of remembering, but also excitement about it creates the proper chemicals that allows us to fix those memories. All of that, it's already within. We don't need anyone to come and teach us this. And then, of course, we have to live as healthy lives as possible, because if you don't nourish the body, you are not going to have the mental, physical capacity. If you don't nourish the body with sources of food that have integrity, meaning nutritional integrity and spiritual integrity. Where's the spiritual integrity? It doesn't come from exploited workers, migrant workers, all of those people who go home poor and hungry while you enjoy a perfectly nice looking organic fair trade lettuce. Okay, so it's not spiritually tainted. When we close those circles, the indigenous intellect starts to flourish and does it at a level that sometimes bursts, and sometimes you just start crying because you don't understand things. That is the beauty of that space. Practice it and you will see, and then find others who are doing the same. And very soon you find yourself in the true communities we are designed to build.
And am I correct in understanding that I don't need to grow my own food in order to participate in high integrity food systems? I just need to understand what those are and connect with them in a meaningful way.
Correct. If you look at a fungi, and by the way, we only know about 10% of the fungal communities on the planet. If you look at a fungi, it depends on the fact that the tree is going to take the process of photosynthesis, manufacture, sugars, and then out of that, some carbon is going to leach in liquid form into the ground. And the tree will do that. The plant will do it intentionally so that that fungus doesn't have to grow its own food, and it becomes attached to its root systems, which in return expands the ability of that tree to communicate not only threats in the environment to other trees and then on and on and on it goes. When you look at the ecosystems and how the specialization in ecosystems actually functions as a web, why should we as humans assume that everybody has to grow their own food? But there is something called symbiosis and something called relationships. We build relationships and then we build symbiosis. And as we build the relationships, then we learn. You grew really good carrots. I grow really good chickens. Taste them, you will see them. And then we build a relationship on the basis of that. Now we got an exchange system. If you actually look at the biological systems exchange of energy and the specialization, and we did a little bit more of that at the levels of our economic designs and social systems design, we would truly then be expressing the optimal geoevolutionary blueprint that we inherited. So absolutely, we just gotta step back again. Let's not assume that, oh, I gotta grow your food. If you don't grow your food, somehow that's a bad thing. No, not if you are living within an ecosystem design. And if we understand the interdependency, the relationships and how to build them, and the symbiotic result that can be captured and capitalized literally on as we create these new webs at a foundational level, that's what regeneration is about. Too many right now are trying to put it into a product, are trying to put it into like company names and to like no-till and organic matter. I mean, it's like, what are you talking about? It was never intended to be either defined or reduced to the myopic understanding and the limitations of our minds. It was never intended to be that. Regenerative is way beyond that. And it results in a way of being. And that way of being is what allows us to see the other 95% of opportunities that the landscape offers. And yes, as a result of that, we will do cover crops, we will do all kinds of other things, but to flip it and to say that that is what is regenerative is such an insult to the indigenous intellect that we are trying to cultivate.
That's really interesting. Let me repeat back to you what I'm hearing and hopefully getting close to understanding, so that when I think about what it takes to create a food system that's genuinely regenerative, I should be looking first in a holistic way at the relationship between the farmers and the production. And I should be asking about the sort of integrity of the relationships, where there are symbioses and where they're not, and the outcomes will, and this is a question, unavoidably or maybe not unavoidably result in some of the practices we think of as regenerative, like cover crops or no-till or organic fertilizers.
Or just letting the gophers out there have their own space.
That's a pretty challenging thing for most gardeners.
It is, but imagine now that there are species of medicines, there are medicinal plants that only grow where the gophers dug the hole. We can't plant. They won't respond to us. They only respond to the gophers' activity. There is a lot of medicines that only grow when the buffalo have a chance to stomp on the ground and to come in contact with their saliva and their teeth, because they have a very different action than the cows. And so there's a lot of things like that we're just not seeing because we are so focused on this idea that we are producers of things. We are not. We're simply stewards of energy transformation processes by which the energy out there goes from non-edible to edible forms, from being CO2 in the air to being a carrot, from being many things out there to being an egg or a chicken. We are not producing anything. We're simply stewarding the process by which that energy is transformed. And when we focus on that instead, and intellectually, scientifically, and technically, then we come up with the most amazing ways to enhance that. Most of the time, because we're not seeing it that way, we interfere with it. And whenever we interfere with that, we end up with less and less continuously. And so this is where it comes down to. Anyway, I'll let you.
No, that's great. And I guess to further unfold this, I'd be really interested in your thoughts on why chickens. It seems like there are lots of ways I could envision building a deep connection with the natural world.
Yeah.
And I guess chickens is
White
one of
chickens,
them.
yeah. So let me break down the biophysics of the planet in a nutshell, 30 seconds. So
chicken-centric.
Yeah, if we're stewards of energy transformation, right? But that energy, before it becomes edible to us, is edible to trillions of other species. right? So you can't eat manure, but you can eat the carrot that came out of the multiple levels that manure went through, and that carbon and oxygen and and nitrogen was transformed, right? And so now it's a carrot, and now we eat it. Okay, so energy transformation as a foundation of regenerative thinking teaches us that there's three places on the planet where energy is transformed. Photosynthesis. The minute you start interfering with the natural, native photosynthetic infrastructure of space, which evolved to do just that, right? Native species that are extremely efficient. Cacti, for example, they call it the desert water, right? Because you can cut it, harvest water out of it, and survive for days in the desert. So photosynthesis, and then the rest of the process going on in there. The trees, everything else that is just photosynthesis, and then comes out in the form of figs and persimmons and all of those other things that we can harvest right away. Most of that energy transformed through photosynthesis is not edible to us. But so it becomes cellulose in the form of grasses and trees and all the kinds of things. And there is the need for animals. So animals can take grasses, for example. A cow can take grasses, chew it up, put it through its 4 spaces in the stomach, and then very soon is pooping and peeing a lot of that same material that was cellulose just about 24 hours earlier. Do the same and put this into a compost pile, and it will take over a year before you see soil. Now, this energy that just came out the other end can go in 48 hours, become nutrition to a fig tree or something else if it was done in an open space. So that's the second level of mass scale transformation of energy on the planet. Animals, the combination of all of our guts and the guts of all of the other organisms on the planet are literally the digestive tract of the planet. To the planet, you know, we got over 1 trillion bacteria and fungi in our gut if you have a healthy gut, right? Well, that bacteria is to us as an organism what we as individuals are to the planet in the context of digestion. That's the second place where energy is transformed, probably at the largest, massive, more efficient scale is through the animal intervention. And then the third level of energy transformation is the soil. That's where the rest of it happens, and then the cycle goes back to photosynthesis, and it just keeps going. There's other transformation of energy in the middle, mostly physical and chemical energy transformation, but this is where most of it happens, right? That's what we owe our lives to. So you come from Guatemala, you got no idea what the heck is going on in this country. But people ask me, what do you feel like when you first got here? And I said, this is the only analogy I can come up with. So there is a grown goose, knows how to swim and knows how to forage and everything. But you take it and put it exactly in the middle of the ocean. Knowing how to do all of those things is going to perish because there is nothing it can do. Yet it will figure a way, maybe fly, maybe make friends with the fish, whatever. That's what I did. So I came to this country and figured, I'm an agronomist, I'm of the earth. This is my thing. If I don't do this, I'm gonna go crazy. I'm gonna get depressed. I'm not gonna be able to live. I will just be a zombie going around and doing stuff with no purpose. So I needed to pick one livestock option to enter the food system, one that was compatible with my background, my economic status in this country, the economics of land access, the economics of food systems, the economics of religion and cultures, and so on and so forth. From all of the livestock on this planet, chickens are the only one that can answer the biggest questions you can ask about systems change. The first two is, if there is an entry, you can only change a system if you have one entry point. You can't change a system poking at it. You got to have one entry point. And two, that entry point has to have the largest potential ripple impact, social, economic, and ecological. Well, nothing beats a chicken at that. It's got to be within the economics, which means, in our case, 1.5 acres gives us the production unit for agronomical engineering purposes. But each one of those production units can be aggregated to create enterprise units, which is the farm level unit. But because they are they are codified not only from ancestral knowledge, but also from the knowledge of the current conditions of the market demands and all of that. We can then take those farms and multiply them by regions. So we can create economies of scale without compromising a single thing I just shared with you. You take those regions and you put one in this region, another one in the other parts of the country, and we calculated 10 of those regions will give us sufficient capacity to deliver 5% at least, meaning 500 chickens, or one out of every 20, 23 chickens that we eat per capita every year in this country. Now you have a theory of change, and the only livestock, thinking about the livestock as the center of energy transformation because of its ability to transform energy faster than even the soil or the photosynthetic infrastructure from space. Now we had a mass scale theory of change and a way to codify it so that it could be replicated at any scale you want. It could be scientifically verified to deliver exactly what we wanted, which was efficiency and energy transformation, and codified to meet the conditions of the over 32 million people who, in the name of cheap food, go home hungry and poor every year in this country. But not only that, chickens don't have cultural barriers, religious barriers anywhere in the world. It's also one of the healthiest proteins, because it's white protein. One of the healthiest proteins is literally the protein of the poor. I owe my little intellect to the fact that I had access to eggs when I was little. If you look at eggs, the amount of cholesterol, the quality of cholesterol, especially free range or tree range eggs, if you look at that, you will realize that by age 7, all of your trunks in your brain, all of your synapses have been actually formed. And cholesterol is central to the formation of all of that brain capacity. If you were deprived of that, the nutrients, then you are stunted for life. That's why there is so much. I mean, I got stunted height weights only, but at least, my brain didn't get as stunted as the rest of it. Anyway, bottom line is, the chicken to us gave us not only the answer to systems change within an industrialized system and country and totally colonized system like the US, but also gave us the answer for every one of the over 700 million farmers who around the world operate on under 25 acres and also produce 70% of the food that we actually eat. This is the real systems change theory. When we succeed at this, we would have built the blueprint for how you transform any industry sector in the world, in a community, in this country, wherever you want to go. That's what we set out to do.
It seems like I'm hearing two things that make chickens unique in this space. One is that the unit cost and expense and difficulty is small, so that you can raise chickens in your backyard and have a sustainable system. And also, the chickens are really impressive in animal-based feeds in terms of having the lowest greenhouse gas footprint. And in our blurb for this session, it speaks to the greenhouse gas footprint of agriculture broadly speaking, and we know that's dominated by animals. And so when you think about poultry as the foundation for sustainable agriculture, do you think about it replacing other protein sources, or do you think about it just to kind of conceptually it's the centerpiece and the foundation?
Oh, I don't think we need to replace or think that way of replacing anybody else. I just figured that if we can replace every degenerative chicken out there, we'll be the healthiest and the richest, country on the planet, because it's such an important protein that we consume. Now, if others decide to change because of that, that'll be awesome, but we don't have to live on a negative set of principles and MO, so to speak. Now, back to the carbon question. So nitrogen actually is the most abundant element, as you know, it's not carbon. Now, CO2 has become a problem because we screwed up the process of how oxygen and carbon behave in its normal life cycles. And so for us, it was critical to look at the infrastructure where the chicken will grow. From an indigenous perspective, again, not from an extractive colonizing perspective, what you do in those cases is you don't look at the chicken from the human perspective. You flip it and you do your best to look at the world from the perspective of the chicken. Now, the chicken is a jungle fowl. It evolved over the jungles of Southeast Asia. It's coded, and you can observe it for a couple of hours and you will know what the chicken wants, literally. It wants shade. It wants to eat out of the ground. It will obliterate anything that flies and moves first. And then it will start eating vegetables. It's like my kids. You go on studying the world from the perspective of the chicken, and very soon you have the perfect geoevolutionary blueprint for how to build a system and the agronomics and everything under which we can raise poultry for the rest of our lives and for the rest of our existence on this planet, and never throw any of those elements out of balance. Not only that, but the chicken is being a jungle fowl. We can now populate, and this is what we do. That's what we call it tree range chicken, because we can now go into a space, and we built a model by which we can move into a new area. And based on that triangular analysis tool, economic, social, and ecological, we can actually weight each choice we're making. In northern Guatemala, we look at avocados, for example, as a potential photosynthetic piece of infrastructure for the chickens. And so you take the avocado and you ask the question, from an ecological perspective, is it a native species? Well, it isn't. So you give it a 0. Is it economically valuable to the community? Well, it gets a 9. Is it socially acceptable? And it gets a 6 and a 7, because most people like avocados. So that is the weight of that choice. But you are not compromising the fundamental 3 levels of energy transformation. And now you have adopted that, and now you have codified an indigenous view of the chicken is not going to differentiate between the avocado and the hazelnut. In Minnesota, we did the same. So we asked the landscape, I asked the elders, and up in the Mille Lacs area, also in Pine Ridge Reservation, we did an exercise where, and also in Nebraska, where I asked the elders to close their eyes and think about the landscape before it was turned into cities and pavement and all of that. And they described what they would see: choke cherries, buffalo berries, tinsel, wild asparagus down by the creeks, oaks, about 3 or 4 kinds of oaks, and so on. And so we said, okay, well, that's our jungle for the chickens. And so now you have optimized the photosynthetic space, which is the way we take all that carbon out of the atmosphere. We have optimized the middle ground, which is where the chicken is raised. And we have optimized then the energy transformation space below. Chickens are incredible at that because they don't compact, they shed a lot. A lot of it is nitrogen, which is critical because we also want to take a lot of that 78% plus of the nitrogen in the atmosphere, because it is the element that is going to do us under. It's not going to be CO2, believe me. I mean, very soon we're going to start realizing that there are chemicals, there are elements in the air that are 300 plus times more toxic to a human, to life, than CO2 is, or even carbon. But if we're going to talk about that, this is about as optimally as it gets, because guess what? Once that carbon comes in, it enters the exchange system of the planetary evolutionary infrastructure. Once it enters that space, it's brought back into balance as long as we stop interrupting it. Once it's in balance again, then we start, it expands. As you know, for every molecule of CO2, we're actually, putting out up to 2 molecules of atoms of oxygen, and then keeping that 1 carbon. What happens then? There is now 2 oxygens to recombine. And so we start not only taking it down, but diluting the extra out in the atmosphere. We haven't yet started even developing the tools and the formulas for calculating the impact that a single molecule of CO2 captured into a system that is actually designed to be regenerative can do to climate. Is that we don't have the tools to measure that yet. We're doing very linear measurement
We
right now.
actually do measure the decrease in atmospheric oxygen that accompanies the increase in CO2.
We do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, great. Well,
And-
then I
and-
need to be
And of course,
schooled on
it's
that too.
that's a tiny number because the concentration of CO2 is roughly 400 parts per million, and the concentration of oxygen is 210,000 parts per million. So it's hard to measure, but we can measure that. I want to ask one more question before we transition to questions from all of you. And my colleague David Lobel back there teaches a class on feeding 9 billion people. One of the grave challenges we face in a world of gigantic population and impending environmental challenges. How do you think about the relationship between regenerative agriculture and the challenge of feeding this massive human population?
So there are two areas, and we got to split it into two. One thing we have done really well is optimize the mechanical aspect of transporting, moving food around the planet. I don't think we have to mess with that. We shouldn't mess with that. What we need to figure out is what goes into that flow and how that flow then treats what goes into it. Because right now, as you know, only 60% of all of the food that goes in there actually gets utilized. The rest of it gets wasted. Now, it's a matter of principle more than a matter of being able to feed the planet. If we are able to just take that 40% waste, and we got more food than we need to feed more than the amount of people that lives in the planet today. But even beyond that, say it wasn't enough. We have taken lettuce from Chile and shipped it across the world. You know that most of the lettuce is water, right? We take vegetables from the San Bernardino Valley and ship it across the country. We are shipping water from where there is no water into places where we are flooding. That's what's wrong with the logic. It isn't about the food. We got plenty of food to feed the planet. And if we go regenerative, we even have more. And as a matter of weight, of actual edible output from a space like ours, we calculated we can harvest up to 30 times more edible stuff, let's call it stuff, out of an acre than if you grow corn and soybeans to go feed cows. This is responsible for balancing the water cycle, cleaning the water, taking the extra carbon in, putting it into a more permanent and then circulating carbon. It rebalances everything and also delivers us about 30 times more edible output. You take the same acre, it creates all of these problems and delivers us a tiny portion of something that is not even edible to us. 40% of the Midwest is plowed under, right? 40% of the Midwest, take the total acreage. Just Minnesota and Iowa alone is over 50 million acres, right? You take those 50 million acres, and we estimated that within Minnesota and just around 2/3 of the total land in Iowa, if we wanted to ship the product across the world from there, we could produce 100% of the chicken that is necessary to feed the world in that tiny space, and we will restore the waterways. We wouldn't be spending millions, $500+ million to take the nitrogen out of the water from the Des Moines River.
Yeah.
So feeding the world isn't really that hard. Is the fact that we have taken this system and turned it into an extracted piece of machinery rather than into a system intended to feed the world. So we got to flip those things. Once we do, we don't have a problem of feeding the world. We have a problem of actually ethically managing the infrastructure to feed the world.
Well, I agree with that, although we should have another conversation at some point about the 30 times, because corn is a really fast growing plant, and you might get more variety from other things, but it's hard for me to see how you get more calories per acre than intensively fertilized corn.
Well, let's not talk about calories though. Let's talk about energy in energy out. And tomorrow I'll show you a formula that actually can be used to measure, but it's not about calories. It's not about calories. It's about the energy and the energy transformation capacity of the space. When we put it into monocultures, we literally get more volume per space with at the cost of that space giving up all of the rest of the value that it could deliver for us. And that's why I can say within the poultry, we started measuring pounds of output in terms of energy output out of that space compared to the energy that went in. And when we start looking into that, think about everything that goes into corn and everything that corn does to the ground, the water that was lost, the tiling systems. The whole Midwest is tiled now. What's the cost of that water? What's the ecosystem cost of that water that is not feeding other species now? And so the true cost accounting, which is now becoming a huge thing, and companies are starting to reckon with the fact that the cost of food is over $10 trillion. Look at the recent report from the FAO. The cost of doing that costs us over $10 trillion every year. And so, yes, we can do these things. And so from a linear perspective, it looks really attractive. Once you put it in within an ecosystem, it really doesn't anymore. And that's why now the global scientific community has actually brought into mathematical equations that are showing the true cost of that. And that's where we're going to go there next. And that's the conversation I would love to have based on that report from FAO, which
Me
is,
too.
yeah.
So, why don't we turn it over to questions? In the front there.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Nargis. I'm with a program called Emergence, which is about inspiring and supporting entrepreneurship for improving human and planetary health. And my question is that from your perspective, how we are in Silicon Valley and Stanford, one of the centers of entrepreneurship, which is about the future of business sector and corporations. How can this sector be more of the service to this viewpoint of regenerative food and agriculture? One area you mentioned is about reducing food waste. And I've seen a lot of interesting startups working on improving the logistics of food distribution. We're also seeing a lot about lab-grown stuff, lab-grown meat, lab-grown cheese, lab-grown palm oil. I don't know how you think about it. But overall, I'm very curious to see what are the opportunities to see entrepreneurship and technology innovation can be of service of this new way of thinking.
Well, from a technological perspective, we really don't have technology to manage regenerative ecosystem level. And back to your question before and to the points that you made, regeneration can only be seen from an ecosystem perspective. Now, we have built a lot of technology, precision agriculture, for example, lots of technology, to the point that John Deere is no longer in the business of selling tractors, right? But it's in the business of selling data. And they now locked up their systems so that they are the ones who own the data that the equipment captures out of the ground. So we need similar efforts at that level of scale technologically so that we can actually track, measure, and improve upon regenerative systems. And we are not even started. We haven't even started yet. Measuring, for example, the flows. Can we chemically tag, say, carbon coming through, monitoring it at transformation rates, for example? The rate of energy transformation in a landscape is the true measure of regenerative outcomes. We don't have, not even started developing tools to do that. Not at least that, we have been engaged with a lot of scientists and nobody has the tools for that yet. We have 4 scientists measuring carbon sequestration, nitrogen, biodiversity in the soil and all of that. And it's still really clumsy the way they are doing it. They are using whatever tools they have available, but we're gonna have to go the way we went with this other conventional technology. Even a weather station, for example, collects more energy out of the barometric pressure all the way to wind speed, humidity in the air, altitude, all of that is captured. Now we gotta get similar technology that does the same so that we can monitor biological activity, chemical exchanges, the internet of the microsphere, for example, systems that would allow us to identify communities of fungal communities, for example. We know that PFAS, for example, that is now encroached into almost everything. It's in our bloodstream already, right? And yet there are fungal communities that would take care of it if we can properly identify them. It's almost endless, the opportunities for technological advances, as long as we are using wisdom, not just knowledge, in the process of developing that technology. And wisdom meaning, let's not extract anymore. Let's make the companies profitable. But would break even be enough for some of these folks? If you had a great salary, went home, happy, you had a family, that your kids could go to college and your bills were paid. Could we be happy enough at true social entrepreneurs like that, rather than just letting the colonizers just go on and on and on and on, wanting more? Now, if we could develop entrepreneurship programs that will excite the indigenous part of us, I think we could break through one of the most incredible barriers of our human capacity to overcome this urge to just colonize and extract everything we see, right? That's the kind of programs we need. And we haven't started them to the extent that we need to. But I think there is so much interest now. A lot of the folks, like Jen came into this space at Tree Range Farms from working at a corporate job that paid her and gave her way more benefits than we could ever afford, right? Everybody in our ecosystem is coming because, dang, they are excited about this new space. And the money, yeah, it's important. We still got to pay our bills. I still don't want to, be in debt with my farm and everything. But compare that to the monstrosity of what we call greed, which, by the way, was declared a mental illness, by the way. So just so we know, let's start dealing with that mental
Until
illness.
people donate to a big university and then it becomes.
Well, but think about it this way. What if the universities were just part of our system, period? It's like who was it that was on the radio recently who was asked, are you guys doing it the same as in the US? And they said, no, if we did it, if the US were to do it the same as we do, you would have universal health care, free education, and all of the universities would be completely endowed and paid for. So how about that for the new entrepreneurship and the new entrepreneurs that we grow out of this generation, right? And there is people, this is why I'm saying it. This is not wishful thinking. This is not utopia. There is so many people today that are not interested on the same old. The challenge is, as institutions, are we willing to go in that direction and start actually igniting that energy and that indigenousness that these folks are actually craving to ignite and grow? I mean, that's the question for those who are in charge. I'm not saying that we need to give up a lot of things. We just got to heal ourselves mentally and spiritually so that greed is no longer the reason we do things.
Allison, is there a question online we should consider?
There's a few great questions, and you've addressed a couple of them, but one is from Britta, and she says, we need to improve the equation to nourish 9 billion people on two sides. One is to produce our food more in line with the environment, for example, regenerative ag. And the other is to make sure the food we produce is fully nourishing. Is there any research or a movement to look at CO2 emissions per nutritional value of food?
It's a big movement, but I don't think it's been articulated like that. Now, the Bionutrient Food Association is almost completely focused on nutrient density as a foundation of these new instruments. A lot of it technological, where they can use a scanner on a product, not on the barcode, but on the product itself, and it can actually give you a nutritional reading. And so it's potentially revolutionary. A lot of investors are not necessarily flocking to it, no pun intended, but it may become one of those solutions that allows the consumer or the people buying food, they shouldn't call it consumer, because consumer is more like machine consuming things, but to identify the nutritional integrity of that food. The other side of it is that we have a lot of infrastructure in place. The internet is something we could harness for the purpose of having, even phone-based apps. I know that is already being worked on, so that, in the soil, we can take a measurement and then can become a mega data for farmers in other parts to identify what kind of soil conditions and biodiversity and all of that generates the best output in terms of nutrient integrity, nutrient density in the food. I will leave it at that for now, but just to point out that there is a bubbling movement that is starting to think, okay, how are we going to do this after spending 10 years going to the conventional sources, trying to see if they will create the technology and the opportunities and not getting responses, right? So it's a huge area of opportunity right now.
Reggie, I really want to thank you for coming and just sharing your wisdom with all of us, challenging us to think in a new way, and wrestling with these tough issues of how do we live well and how do we support the planet. I think there are probably more questions in the room, but I want to finish on time. We encourage people to stay a while. We have some refreshments. And thanks everybody for coming, and thanks again. Let's get right here.